like?
Yeah, that looks great.
Great, thanks. Yeah, well, so great to be here and connect with this audience. And yeah, happy for any questions along the way. So what I thought would be good to cover today is first just a little bit about broadly about Maine Farmland Trust work and our mission statement. And then kind of set the scene with a little look at what agriculture in Maine looks like. And also just make sure we're on the same page with conservation easements. And then talk about really the evolution of our land protection and access work and how they're intertwined and serve each other. I think that's kind of a good framework to look through how we're sort of evolving in our thinking on land access work. So firstly, just sharing our mission statement. We are a member-powered statewide organization that works to protect farmland, support farmers, and advance the future of farming. We've been in existence for, I think this is our 25th year. We've protected 290 plus farms and approaching about 60,000 acres of protected farmland. We also offer business planning support and technical assistance support to different farmers in our network. We have our Farm Link program, which is some piece of our farmland access work, connecting those with land tenure opportunities with farmers looking for land. And we also do a lot of policy work at the state, federal, and local level as well. And I like to share the mission statement up front, not just to check a box, but I really do think as our work has evolved, this still holds true, and every kind of step in the evolution is hopefully getting us closer to, achieving this mission. So next thing I want to do is just talk a little bit about agriculture in Maine. This is info from the 2017 census. We should have an updated report this year, but we have about 7,600 farms, a lot of smaller diversified farms. The average acreage is about 172, which roughly holds true with the average acreage of farms that we've worked with as well. And there's some larger commodity crops in Maine in certain pockets. You have the potato land up in the St. John River Valley in northern Maine, up in the county, as folks in Maine say. And then you have the blueberry barrens in eastern Maine, down east as it's known around here. But then other than that, it's mostly smaller diversified farms, especially as the dairy industry is declining a bit. There's more and more of these smaller diversified farms located mostly in river valleys. If you look at an aerial of Maine, you see there's relatively finite and small pockets of good farmland soils. And I think one of the reasons that's important to highlight is a lot of our farming and farms we work with is occurring in areas with lots of competing interests to take land out of agriculture and to take land out of the hands of farmers, whether that's traditional residential development, commercial renewable energy development more and more. And Maine is known as vacation land. That's our state motto. So there's also a lot of pressure from second homeowners and estate type development that are, large lot development that is not necessarily agricultural in nature. I'm sure most folks are probably pretty well versed in what agricultural conservation easement is, but I thought we would just make sure we're on the same page there. So yeah, the way we've kind of combated some of those pressures that I was just discussing is primarily through the use of these agricultural conservation easements, which are these permanent restrictions that protect the agricultural resources of a property. The overarching goal, I think, is to allow activities that help a farm business thrive while preventing activities that are detrimental to the agricultural potential of the property into the future. And there's different kinds of agricultural easements. Different kinds of conservation easements. There's groups that are interested in protecting scenic resources or protecting habitat, Whereas I think of an agricultural conservation easement, a working lands easement, which means there's a broader variety of activities that are permitted. And the other important thing, especially when thinking through a land access lens, is that these conservation easements have value. You're essentially, sort of the classic example that people usually talk about is property ownership comes with a bundle of rights, and the easement is restricting some of those rights, mostly around division and keeping fields open, some restrictions on development. But there is a value that is most often determined by an appraisal that those easements carry and hold. And by restricting them, you're hopefully making the land more affordable for folks in the future. So yeah, this is, a lot of our work, again, is through the use of these easements. And early on, we primarily had worked with donated easements, which are really an important piece of the puzzle in securing this land base and making it sure it's available in the future. And so yeah, really important piece of the puzzle, but there is a limited pool of landowners who are in a position to donate an easement and give up that value without receiving anything but potentially some tax deductions. So that was a big piece of the puzzle, but there's this whole other pool of landowners out there that hold lots of farmland that will go through transition that can't really interact with our work by donating an easement. So the next big sort of piece of our work was using public funds to purchase easements, whether it be through the federal program or the state-run program. And this is a huge funding source, and especially in our earlier years when we had less private philanthropic funds, that allowed you to engage with landowners who needed to realize some cash influx from the sale of these easements, and would allow an aging landowner to transition out and receive some money and transition the property to the next generation, and generally just makes the pool of landowners that we can work with to protect the land larger. And then what really sort of was the next level for us was developing our own purchased easement program through the use of private philanthropic funds. Because the big drawback to the publicly funded easements are really around timing. Some of these projects can take several years to get through the public funding processes. At the state level, the funds that were available were, often, depending on who was in power at the time, were not available. So once we were able to have our own sort of purchased easement program, it allowed us to act more quickly and really work with properties that are at the moment of transition, and really helped us leverage these easements as a land access tool. You see, I wrote something about simultaneous closings here. We began to work quite a bit with landowners to farmers essentially looking for land to sell an easement at the same time that they are purchasing a farm. And we could then bring that money to the table, which would decrease the amount that they have to finance to make that purchase happen. And so that has been really successful for us as a way to get folks on land and at the same time protect that property in perpetuity. The other piece of programming that we do that has been a really powerful tool for us for land protection and land access is our Buy, Protect, Sell program. And this is, and we'll get in a little more into this later as well, but this is essentially when a farm comes up for sale, and maybe there's not an identified farmer buyer right away, or there is, and they just can't quite make the purchase happen at its value in the open market. Maine Farmland Trust would purchase the farm and then sell it to an incoming farmer at its value as protected by a conservation easement. And you'll see this note here about often also including affordability provisions, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, but sort of looking for other ways to suppress the value when we, as a nonprofit, when we sell a farm, we can't sell it for less than its appraised value, essentially. So looking for ways to suppress that value to get it in the hands of farmers at a price that allows them to succeed. And this is when the properties are most vulnerable to transitioning out of agricultural use and sort of forever be lost as working farms. So those simultaneous closings I mentioned, when a property is for sale, working to sell an easement with an incoming farmer, and our buy, protect, sell programs have been really powerful tools to capture these properties when they're most vulnerable to exiting agricultural use. And so as we did this work for many years, there still are questions around affordability of properties for farmers, even when protected with an easement, even when that value is suppressed by getting rid of what you might think of as the traditional development right to subdivide a property. As I mentioned, Maine is known as vacation land. There's lots of beautiful rural properties up here that folks might be interested in buying and not necessarily developing, but just having a large, we call it an estate lot, where they're not really actively using the land for agriculture, and they don't really care that they can't subdivide it. So there's this whole sort of pool of buyers that keeps, in some areas of the state, keeps the value of these properties still out of the reach of a working farmer, even when protected with a conservation easement. So a couple of things that we started doing the last 5+ years to try to address this land access issue. One of them that we'll talk a bit more detail with an example is the option to purchase at agricultural value, and we'll get into that on the next slide. Also, have explored putting some residential footprint limitations. Our conservation easements often allow for expansion or creation of a new residence. We want folks to be able to live on the land that they work, obviously. However, around the Northeast, there's been some issues with properties protected with a conservation easement, but a extremely large home placed on the property that sort of makes the property then unaffordable going forward for any farmer who might want to purchase and farm that land. And we also always are looking to make changes to our easement language to accommodate different housing needs from different types of farming communities, perhaps allowing divisions when it would make two viable farm parcels, thus ensuring that that land is accessible to the farmers given the current agricultural climate. But the one that we really have begun to use more and more is this option to purchase at agricultural value. And essentially what this is a provision that goes into a conservation easement that gives the holder of that easement, the land trust, the option to purchase a farm at its appraised value as agricultural land if that property is under contract to be sold to somebody who is not a qualified farmer or a family member. With the idea being, again, trying to address that issue where properties protected with conservation easements were being sold to folks who weren't necessarily using them for agriculture, and thus, bringing them to price levels that were out of reach from farmers. And this also increases the easement value, which allows us to get that value down again at a level that is hopefully more affordable for working farmers. And so we don't interfere in farmer to farmer sales, and it also can be waived. If somebody has a strong plan to farm the property, Maine Farmland Trust does not have to exercise that option. And that option runs in perpetuity with the deed, just like the conservation easement. So a good example of what this can do is, here's a property in Windham, Maine, which is outside of Portland, about 90 acres, real nice farmland soils. It was actually on the aerial view that we looked at in the previous slide. And that property was for sale in the open market for $650,000. This was several years ago now, so at that time that price was definitely out of reach of this group of experienced farmers who were looking for land for their diversified operation in the area. They have a large CSA and sell at a lot of farmers markets. So the value of the easement without that OPAV provision was about $255,000. So that definitely suppressed the property value, but still was a bit out of reach for these farmers to comfortably make this purchase. So including the option to purchase at agricultural value, the appraisal of that easement went up by 100,000, thus allowing the landowners to get on this property at a $295,000, and basically, you know, eliminating or suppressing that pool of buyers who would be looking to buy this as a protected piece of land, but not necessarily farming it. So that has become more and more a big piece of our work to ensure that the land protection projects we do are resulting in farmers getting on the land. And it's helped in the transfers from farmer to farmer, but also intergenerational or generational transfers. And we've also started exploring going back in time to properties that we've protected with easements that did not have that OPAV provision and adding it in. So here's an example of that, where this was a property worth over $1 million, again, in southern Maine, similarly sized property. On the open market, it would be over $1 million. In 2016, we purchased an easement for $494,000, and the family wanted to sell the farm to the grandson, which would be the 5th generation, and their kids would be the 6th generation to be on this land. But they couldn't, the current owners couldn't get off the property unless they could sell it for about $600,000. And so to facilitate that transaction, we purchased this option to purchase at ag value for $145,000, which was the appraised value of that option. That allowed the farm to transfer generations at a price of $455,000, which again put it in reach of these younger farmers and allowed the previous generation to get what they needed to transition off of the property. So as that work has evolved, we're still sort of thinking about how do we evolve our work to make sure that we're serving anyone who wants to enter the food system. And so we've started calling this Farmland Protection 2.0, which I don't know how that name stuck, because it does kind of feel like it's just a natural continuation and not necessarily a 2.0. But at any rate, over the last several years, we're really trying to think of how our programs can serve anybody in Maine who wants to participate in the Maine food system, and what are those barriers and what have those barriers been to folks who want to participate in the Maine food system but haven't been able to, and how can our programs help them? So, you know, traditionally taking advantage of Maine Farmland Trust, farmland protection and access programming really required property ownership or the ability to own property and take out a 30-year mortgage in the near term. Our BPS work, often we thought of the best BPS projects by Protect Sell were when we could turn around and sell that property quickly. So we're not have a lot of carrying costs and complications with property ownership and things like that. But you know, there's plenty of people who would love to participate in the food system in Maine and who could do a great job on farms, but don't have the ability to either currently own land or own land in the near future. So increasingly, we're looking towards modifying some of our BPS work to provide a longer on-ramp to ownership, is what we're calling it. Basically, there could be situations where it's perfectly acceptable for us to own the property for several years while the farmers are leasing and working towards getting financing. And we also have the ability to provide some wraparound services to help them with business planning and getting to a point where they have a successful application for financing. Or perhaps there's even different land tenure arrangements that involve longer term leases without ownership ever being on the table. And so this is really where we see the evolution of our work going towards this type of modifications to our BPS program. And we recently secured a USDA grant that will give us some funding to do some of this work for low income and BIPOC and new American populations. And we also thought I'd also provide a quick example of a project that was one of the projects that got us thinking in this way. And this is a farm called the New Roots Cooperative in Lewiston, Maine. And Lewiston is home to many new American Somali Bantu refugees who come from agricultural communities in Somalia. And in 2015, this cooperative was beginning to get formed, and they were looking for a piece of land within Lewiston to purchase and expand their operation. They had been leasing land in the area for several years beforehand. And Lewiston there's not often farmland that comes available in Lewiston. So, you have to kind of act quickly if something is available that fits with what you might be looking for. And at the time, this group of folks was not in a position to buy that property in 2015. But recognizing that this was, perhaps their best shot at getting on a piece of land that fit their needs in the location they were looking, MFT purchased the property in 2015 and leased it with an option to purchase to the New Roots Cooperative. And then there were several partnerships along the way that helped support these farmers in fundraising and financing and business planning. You see some of the partners listed there, to get them to a point that in 2022, they purchased the farm, protected at its value, protected with a conservation easement, and now own the property and are extremely thrilled with that outcome. And I think that really helped open our eyes to the fact that this is a great way to get folks on a land, and this longer on-ramp to ownership can help you meet some of your land access goals, even though it might be a bit riskier financially. It really is worth it to hit some of these other goals in our work. So I think I'll leave it there, and I don't know if we're doing questions now or later, but at any point, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much. I think we're going to hold questions till the very end. So we'll pass it over to Krisztian, and then we'll have a question period after that.
Hi there. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. I will go ahead and attempt to share my information. Y'all can tell me if this does not work. How did that work?
That looks great.
Awesome. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Brett. That was amazingly informative and really laid all the groundwork for making my life really easy to share what we do, which is really very in line with the work that Maine Farmland Trust has been doing for many years, and really even laid groundwork essentially for us to be able to kind of think the way that we do about farmland transition in the work that I do. So yeah, so my name's Krisztian Varsa. I am the program manager for doing work in Georgia, specifically the state of Georgia in the States. And this was also the place that we piloted the program that I'm working on. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about that program. It's a program we call the Farms Fund. Sometimes it's called the Working Farms Fund. We use kind of both interchangeably. And it's a program that we started about 4 years ago, piloting it here outside of Atlanta, Georgia, in a major metropolitan area. And I'm going to share a little bit about the program, what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and some of the farmers that we're working with. And I'll definitely welcome any feedback and questions. I will say things like USDA, which is the United States Department of Agriculture. A subsidiary of the USDA is the NRCS, which is the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Those are two of my big acronyms. Another common acronym is BPS, which is Buy, Protect, Sell, which Brett already touched on. And then I like to use another acronym occasionally, which is BSPS, which is Buy, Support, Protect, Sell, which is kind of the model that we are specifically engaged in. So that's the little headline on the front of this. The Conservation Fund is a bigger organization. We have protected lands across all 50 states in the States. We got our start through the Nature Conservancy back in the 80s. Our original leader split off and wanted to do something very real estate focused, very transactional. And so we moved into a space of doing very specific real estate conservation real estate work, which kind of led itself to having a dual mission of both being a conservation as well as a economic development organization. And that dual charter has continued forward and kind of informs the work that we do today. Our work really historically has touched a lot of different kinds of places, everything from southern longleaf forests to beautiful, huge natural landscapes. We've done national park work, national forests, a lot of the ranging and grasslands, and a lot of natural and recreational kinds of acquisition as well. But the organization has done about 9 million acres total in protection. About 3 million acres have been in working lands, but not many of those working lands looked like this, which was like an intact small to mid-size working farm. And recognizing the importance of the long-term transition of farmland that is occurring in the United States, and the demand for local food and the importance of people having access to fresh, healthy local food in our major metropolitan communities, we set out in the early 2020 to start addressing some of those challenges. So as just kind of reiterating a lot of the things that have already been acknowledged, there's a lot of development pressure on small to mid-sized farms outside of major metropolitan areas. In the States, we've lost many millions of acres. I think our statistic that is now old is that we lose 40 acres of farmland every hour in the United States. Probably is more than that right now. And in the meanwhile, we have an aging farmer population. The average age of the farmer in the United States is 58 and climbing. And there is no systematic pathway to transition that farmland to next generation operators who want to grow their farm businesses and succeed, especially outside of major metropolitan areas, which means potentially fewer farmers. Here's an example. In Metro Chicago, the acres used harvest produce for human consumption out was 11,000 acres in 1995. By the 2010s, we were down to 4,600 acres outside of Chicago. Just as a data point on the trajectory of food, even in the areas that are considered the agricultural communities of our country, food for people has not been the priority outside in those metropolitan areas. Meanwhile, the demand for local food in the communities where people are, and they want to have access to fresh, healthy local food in their communities, just continues to rise. And there's a mismatch between the demand and the supply, really. And the number of next generation farmers is growing. For only the second time in the last century, in the United States, the number of farmers under the age of 35 actually increased. So there are glimmers and signs of hope and things to be done, but there are going to need to be significant systematic tools used to make that shift possible. So the Farms Fund was launched in, we bought our first farm in Atlanta at the end of 2020, early 2021. And it's essentially, our goal is to create a very patient path to affordable farmland ownership that essentially breaks down that initial barrier to land access and gives the farmer an opportunity to build their farm business and accelerate their growth as a farm business into larger, more effective farm businesses on more effective farms. In the meanwhile, using conservation easements, which Brett, again, nicely teed up, using conservation easements to bring the development value off of the properties and make them affordable to sell to the farmer on the back end. And this is the same model essentially that Brett described, which was a buy, protect, sell, or what we also often call a buy, support, protect, sell, which is just a system where the conservation fund or whatever organization is involved steps out and recognizes a need to purchase a farm that's under threat of development or has a very high agricultural value to a next generation farmer. In our case, we match a farmer to that farm before we make the farm purchase. We then make the farm purchase, taking it out of the threat of development, and place the farmer onto the farm, just like you were describing, Brett, also. To ensure that the farmer is successful, we give the farmer 3 to 5 years to build out their farm business on that site. That gives the farmer a number of things. It gives them the ability to build out new markets, expand their farm business, which takes a lot of time and a lot of resources and a lot more capital. It also gives us the opportunity to bring resources to the table that otherwise would be very difficult for a next generation farmer to do. So in the United States, for NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which again is part of the USDA, for them to deliver resources to a farmer, first, you have to have access to the land. If you don't have the land, you can't ask for help with the land. It's one of the backwards things in the world. And so we give the farmer the land, and then they're able to bring the resources of conservation and high tunnels and irrigation and all the things that are needed to build out a healthy, sustainable farm to the table. We also work with NRCS and other local agencies to ensure that they are able to get access to those resources. Specifically, I say resources, I mean money, cost share money. And then on the back end, we work with our, again, partner, NRCS, to secure conservation easement dollars and local and state funders as well in local government to buy the value of the conservation easement on the property. That's all of the development rights on the property, which outside of major metropolitan areas tends to be as high as 50, 60, occasionally even 70% of the value of the property can be wrapped up in those development rights. That's all just speculative development potential of the property that we take off the table by buying the conservation value of that from the land. At that point, the farmer then buys the land from the conservation fund. They are buying a property that has been permanently protected, but they've also spent that time of building their farm business, of learning about what they needed to do on site to build out their business and know what kind of, maybe there's a high agricultural use area. You want to be able to make, say the easement says, all right, we're going to have our ag buildings here, but we want to have production spaces over here, or we need a new road over here. It gives them the time to kind of figure that piece out. And then it makes the farm affordable for them. And frankly, the farmers that I'm working with are all really dedicated to these kinds of outcomes anyway. So it's been a really nice connection to bring the conservation easement dollars to the table for groups that have historically been kept out of a lot of these resources and support. So in Georgia, I could be wrong. It's been a few years since I've talked to the easement specialist about this, but I'm pretty sure the NRCS, the federal agency that provides farmland conservation easements, had never purchased a farmland easement with a Black or BIPOC producer in the state. And so that just shows you a lot about who owns the land, who is gaining access to those resources, under what conditions. And so this is a pathway to ownership, but it's also a pathway to receiving the resources that are out there that otherwise are oftentimes traditionally difficult to access for some of these groups. So we are working, I guess one thing I'd like to, I like to clarify for some folks is that the farmers that we're working with are folks that have some farm management experience. They know what it is to own and operate a farm business. They want to produce typically on more than 20 acres of land. Maybe not all of that is in production, but at least they have the goals of scaling up their farm business to increase their production level and possibly meet wholesale production levels. Now, wholesale means different things to different people, but that's kind of the goal, because at the end of the day, we're really hoping that we can have sustainable food secure communities. And so increasing the production on some of these farms is going to be important for that. They have to provide financial records for multiple growing seasons. They have to be willing to at least create a viable farm business plan that makes sense for the farm that we are acquiring for them. And they have to have a commitment at least to some level of sustainable agricultural practices that are improving the future for those that come after us. This is just a real quick snapshot of the farms that are currently in Georgia. To give you a sense of scale, all of these farms are within 75 miles of the center of Atlanta. Kind of hard to tell exactly what kind of distance we're talking about on this map, but you can see that we're clustering farms together. We are anchoring farms in areas that there were networks of existing farmland, but they're all under threat of development from subdivisions that are pushing further and further out from the center of Atlanta into existing farm acreage. We have done this with significant commitment from market partners. I mean, obviously technical assistance partners as well, but our market partners have been huge because we really want to see farmers having an opportunity to have good contracts, excellent growth opportunities, consistent sales where they don't have to worry about who is coming to the table. They know that these consistent markets are coming and that they are there, and the door is open for them when they're ready to sell to them as they scale up their business. There are a few farm businesses that I include here. I think it's just good to recognize, we're talking about 90 acres of production for a livestock operation and a diverse family of different ages and people working together to make a several farm and retail outlet work to happen all together. This is a group of 5 people working together on a cooperative farm. They got together and formed a new farm business entity that they are all co-owners of. And if I would highly recommend learning more about their operation. They're doing really interesting, amazing things. 3 years ago, they were on about an acre and a half in the city of Atlanta with a 200-member CSA. They now have a 400-member CSA on almost 70 acres. This year, they will gross almost $1 million in revenue due to the amount of production that they've managed to scale up on those 70 acres. I just got off the phone with Najib. There's Najib and his father. Najib is a combination hibiscus and poultry operator. He now has the only Georgia certified small poultry processing facility in the whole state. He's not USDA certified, which is U.S. Department of Agriculture. They check those kinds of things, but he is Georgia certified, and that puts him in a special class all of his own. So these are very ambitious and excited, and they just really, the land is what is needed to spark the next opportunity. Global Growers Network is here because they're a nonprofit entity. We can work with a nonprofit entity. They needed an opportunity to scale up their business because they support other farmers. So there are really unique, diverse types of businesses that we work with, doing lots of different kinds of strategies of building the local food system. Snapfinger Farm, Rahul Anand is a dynamo. He scaled from 2.5 acres in very intensive production. This year, he's at about 20 acres of open land with significant forward contracts from the market partner, the common market, where he is selling $10,000 worth of produce off of this farm every week without even blinking. It's a 190-acre farm. 80 acres of that is floodplain and river, and only 40 acres is actually in production. So it's amazing how much, mid-sized scale is even able to produce. I think Brett touched on this really well. I will say easements are helpful for affordable farmland ownership. They do bring the investment of your local agencies and people who care about food and farmland conservation. We'll just keep rolling. I'm just trying to keep my time here. Right now in Georgia and Chicago, we're at about 10 farms total. I think these numbers are actually a little dated. I think we're at about 13 or 14 farms. We're quickly ramping up right now. And we are, at the end of this month, I'll cross the 1,000-acre threshold in Georgia alone. So we will have more than 10 farms, about 11 farms and about 1,100 acres by the end of this month in Georgia. About $10 million will be in the ground in Georgia. The Conservation Fund, by being able to raise philanthropic dollars, has invested almost $200,000 directly in on-farm infrastructure with the farmers. Deer fencing, coolers, wells, all the things needed to start up a new farm. We've been able to anchor those farmers and give them something to build from. I think really importantly, because of our commitment to recognizing who has historically been afforded land access, afforded loans, afforded capital, we've been really dedicated to focusing on farmers of color. And so we're at, right now, 68% of the farm owners in the program are farmers of color. And that's a goal we intend to continue striving toward. We do intend to grow this program. You'll notice Canada is not on the list right now. I think maybe I needed to update this before this call, but would love to consider options in Canada as well. But our goals are to grow this program so that we are able to change the food system in major metropolitan areas across the United States and impact more and more people who want access to fresh, healthy local food. All right. I think I got kind of close on my time, but thank you for the time. I really enjoyed being able to share that with you all, and I am happy to entertain some questions with Brett.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. I have multiple pages of notes scribbled on both sides. There was a lot of really fantastic information that you shared in there for folks. So I see that we do have a couple of questions, and so I'll start off with asking the first one here. Wondering what advice you might have for municipalities looking to support farmland protection through partnerships or initiatives with organizations such as yourselves. In other words, what can municipalities or staff do to help you do what you do? Any examples that have worked well? Either of you interested in taking that one on first?
I can say something real quick about it, but obviously, Krisztian, feel free to hop in as well. One thing that always comes to mind to me, being a statewide organization, is just being sort of ears to the ground as much as possible. A lot of times we rely on people within local communities who have better understanding of what's going on in that community to let us know when opportunities arise or when farmland's perhaps going to be going through transition, things like that. And then the other thing is, starting conversations and there's conservation committees within certain municipalities. Obviously, funding is always huge. If there can be money brought to the table to do some of this work, that's always welcomed.
Certainly, I would echo that.
I think it's a great question. Just to echo a lot of Brett's thoughts, I would say, to do what we do, which is land trust work, probably the most effective thing you could do as a local municipality is commit funds to easement protection. That is the number one most equitable thing and fair thing for a farmer, is to pay them for the easement in as much full as you can. You want to pay them for the value of the rights you are taking away. And I mean, there are really good examples out there of individual municipalities who have done significant change in protection outside of their community. Like Ann Arbor, Michigan is a fantastic example that the Conservation Fund has been involved there, but Ann Arbor dedicated like a $25 million green bond to like a green belt, but like a farmland related green belt many years ago. And now they have just a incredibly robust long-term vision for an agriculturally viable community outside of their community. Those kinds of things are really valuable, and the sooner you can start, the better. You go to a larger municipality size, and like the state of Pennsylvania in the United States, they have committed $1 billion with a B to farmland protection over the last 30 years. And now they have hundreds of thousands of acres of permanently protected farmland for their state. So that's, money, obviously. And then from a policy perspective, there are always things you can do to secure farms and farmland for your community. Some of them have to do with really boring things like zoning, making sure your zoning permits good farm activities while the farm is being pressured from the outside. Like, people are going to move into those communities, into suburbs, and say, oh, it stinks, or oh, the farmer's got the tractor on the highway, or oh, it's making too much noise, or whatever. And the farmers need to be protected. They also need to have opportunities to sell. So, farm side stands or commercial activities or other non-traditional farm work does help to diversify a farm operation. And so being open-minded about, farms have multiple uses and multiple impacts, and trying to allow for policies that both support the farmers and build out space for them to succeed. There are some communities out there who have minimum acreage numbers. So you have to, if for one housing unit, you have to have at least 20 acres of land. on a particular parcel. That's a good way to protect large parcels of farmland into the future as well. So there are lots of policy things you could do. Those are some of my few thoughts.
Perfect, thank you. We do have another question. It is specific to asking in the context of Canada, specifically Ontario, but would like to know where beginner farmers can go for support for farmland protection by BIPOC in Canada, specifically Ontario. I'm part of a community who are working to own 100 acres outright. There are various resources and tools for connecting folks that I believe Tamara has planned to dump into the chat momentarily. So we can provide some information from the Ontario context for that. And otherwise, that looks like that's all of our questions at the moment, and we are coming up to time. So I'm going to pass it back over to Tamara.
Thanks, Martin, and thanks, Krisztian and Brett, for sharing about your organization. It's quite exciting to see what's happening in the States and what could be possible for Ontario's future as well. So I do have a few land access resources for Ontario that I can pop into the chat here. If you have other ones that you know about, feel free to share them as well. FarmLink and Find Farmland are both websites where you can connect farmers and farm owners. The NFUO has a new land access program, as well. Just Food and Sundance Commons are two incubator farms in the Ontario area. But definitely there's a lot happening right now. So yeah, stay tuned for the next couple of years. There's probably going to be a lot more programs popping up. If you'd like to get more involved with the Ontario Farmland Trust, we have a newsletter as well as social media accounts, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that. You can also become a member or donor if you want to become more involved in on that side of things. We also have a new volunteer program that we've just launched. So if that interests you, that's both remote volunteering or in-person volunteering. You can send me an email or check out the volunteer tab on our website. We also have events like the webinars. Our next event is the Farmland Forums. That's happening in March, Thursday, March 21st, both in Elora and online as well. So no matter where you are welcome to join. We're pretty excited for that. We're just confirming our speakers now, and we're going to have a lot of discussion and networking time, including for folks online. That was a big piece of feedback we got last year. So stay tuned for registration opening in February. And a last note, a thank you to our webinar supporters, the Ken and Debbie Rubin Public Interest Advocacy Fund through the Ottawa Community Foundation, as well as the McLean Foundation and the Greenbelt Foundation. So thank you to them for supporting this work, and for everyone coming out today, Brett and Krisztian, for sharing your stories.